Welcome to the Wandering Herbalist. It's a podcast with me, Fiona Morris, about wild remedies and nature's wisdom around the world. And this is my very first episode, so I'm very excited to welcome a very special herbalist colleague and friend, Amanda Edmiston of Botanica Fabula. Welcome, Amanda.
Hi, Fiona. Thank you so much. And it's lovely to be your first guest.
It's a pleasure. And it's been something that's been on my mind for quite some time. I reached out to you a while back saying, I'm going to start doing this podcast. And then felt a bit wintry. And now that springtime is here, it just felt like the right time. And it happens to be today is Earth Day, which has been going on for over 50 years. So it's quite well established, although I don't know how widely it's celebrated, but I think it's quite nice and synchronicitous that we are launching our first chat on this podcast today. And also, and I wondered if it might have linked up because the sun recently went into Taurus, which is, as we both know, both of us having our moons in Taurus, is a very earthy sign. And so it felt quite auspicious to be launching a herbal podcast at the beginning of the sun in Taurus, on Earth Day, and with Beltane just around the corner as well. So lots of it all feels very aligned. And I'd like to just do a short introduction of you and your work, Amanda. So Amanda is a herbal storyteller. She is the author of the Time Travelers Herbal book, which came out last year, which is a gorgeous book. You must have a look at that if you haven't already. Really, really beautiful. And also the creator of Botanica Fabula School of Herbal Storytelling. Amanda offers online courses. She offers events for adults and children in locations all over the UK and indeed all over the world. You were at a retreat in New York, I believe, recently, weren't you? Or at the beginning of the year?
In upstate New York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're definitely a great example of a wandering herbalist. And I'd like to ask you a little bit about your herbal roots and also your traveling roots, because I'm aware that some of your descendants come from the Romany lineage. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think it's something that's always fascinated me since I was a child. I guess probably the romance drew me in from an early age, but the family mythology is that my great grandfather on my mother's side was brought up by his mum with his brother in a caravan or maybe a carriage in the woods. And we don't know a huge amount about them other than at the turn of the start of the 20th century, she was a single parent, which would have been quite unusual. Certainly in common with a lot of Romanian traveling families, my great grandfather wasn't registered at birth. I mean, I know from a bit of research that a lot of families didn't have their child baptized or christened or written down, made formal note of until one of the periods of time when people traditionally traveled for work. So in that part of the south of England, a lot of the seasonal work would have been around either fruit picking or hop picking, because it's part of the hop area, hop growing area. So I don't know a huge amount of detail, but I do know that they ended up somehow in the workhouse. And my great grandfather, at the age of about 14, got himself a job as a farm labourer and started to save money, and saved enough money to buy his own bit of land, which he built up over the years. And when I was little, there were still orchards. And my mum tells amazing stories about climbing the cherry trees in the orchards on my great grandfather's farm when she was little. So I grew up knowing that my grandmother on my mother's side came from this Romany background. and she was the person, I guess, who informed my early love of plants, because she had a beautiful garden, and she would, from when I was very little, just walk me around the garden, telling me the
Oh,
name of plants, getting me to smell things, and telling me how they were used. So yeah, that's, I guess that's kind of a main point of interest in the family narrative for me. And I think there's possibility that I'm going on to do a bit more research into that area of my background, and into herbal remedies from that culture later on this year. But that's maybe something we'll come back and talk about in the future.
yes, yeah. I can't wait to hear more about that once you've kind of delved into that a little bit. So you've been nurtured from a very young age in the world of herbs and gardens and storytelling. Your mum's also a storyteller, isn't she?
She was a textile artist before she became a storyteller,
Okay.
and she's gone
Mhm.
back to that after retiring a few years
Mhm.
ago. But yeah, she was a storyteller, wonderful storyteller, for over 35 years.
Wow. And so you followed in her footsteps in that regard in terms of going down the storytelling route. And did she also, like you, have a strong emphasis on plant-based lore and herbal storytelling? Or is that something that you got more into? Tell me a little bit more about how that came about.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And really, the focus of my mum's work when she started out as a storyteller, we were living down, we're from the northeast of Scotland originally, with, you know, a little bit of English Romany thrown in. But I certainly was born, and my mum was born and grew up in Aberdeen. But
Mhm.
by the time my mum started to storytell, we were living down in Bristol in the southwest of England. And at the time, we've explored aspects of this before when you collaborated with me on the Silk Roads, one of my online courses. But at the time, my
Yes.
mum, um, storytelling wasn't as widespread as it is now. And although Bristol and that area of the southwest is hugely culturally diverse, we moved there during a period of quite intense racial tension, and there weren't the diverse ethnic minority voices coming through. When I say minority, actually, in our part of Bristol, you know, it was quite evenly spaced, but there weren't many storytellers, and the voices of non-white people were not being heard in terms of
Mhm.
professional storytelling in schools, reaching out without their own community. And my mum was asked a lot to. She worked as training people to work with anti-racist material, and was working a lot in that field in other aspects of her work.
Mhm.
And so she was asked to go into
Okay.
schools that had a really rich, diverse cultural mix and tell stories. And she
Mhm.
brilliantly elected to often share stories from several different cultures, because it gave um,
Mhm.
the, the background of a lot of the children or the community groups in those settings a voice. And you know, we're storytelling animals. We
Yeah.
learn through immersing ourselves in stories. And stories, as I often say, it's a quote by a brilliant storytelling elder, Alida Gersi, but she said that stories offer a safe place to explore difficult points of view. And so stories offer this sort of wonderful immersive look at somebody else's culture, but without being too challenging, because they're about somebody else, not about you. So
Mhm.
my mum's field was that. And you know, I started off doing a lot of stories from other people's cultures and spiritual or religious backgrounds, and interweaving them with my work on plants. I do a lot less of that now, because those cultural voices have come through as on the professional storytelling circuit, and it now feels slightly appropriate
Mhm.
to then go into a setting when there is a brilliant, African storyteller able to narrate those stories far better and far more informed than I am. So I don't do it so much. But my mum's always worked with plants. I guess her block prints of her fabric when she first started creating textiles were often informed by plants. She certainly taught me more formal aspects of botany and was always outside with me. Her storytelling, I guess we have a really strong love of the natural environment and of plants and geology and, a real connection to nature in my family. But her storytelling, that wasn't the primary focus of her storytelling. It was always about finding cohesion and clear communication. I think as a storyteller and working with other storytellers, you kind of need a niche. And for me, because I'd not only had this foundation layer of plants, then studied herbal medicine, and I chose not to go into clinical practice, that became my primary focus as opposed to my mum's. But certainly, a long answer. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of factors.
So you studied herbal medicine. Yeah, you studied herbal medicine, didn't you, at the Glasgow School, Scottish School of Herbal Medicine? Isn't that right?
I did. Yeah.
And did you go into that purely to kind of just have a deep dive into herbs in a way to inform your herbal storytelling, or was there a time where you thought you might go into private practice, sort of as a sideline, or what was your intention either before or after, or did that change while you were there?
Changed completely while I was there. I went into it having I really had a period where I didn't know what I wanted to do. Some quite dark days. Wasn't really very happy in my situation at the time. Elected to move up to Glasgow to study at the Scottish School of Herbal Medicine, and then things changed while I was there. I got pregnant unexpectedly with my eldest daughter, and was a single mum at the outset until I met my partner when she was 4 or 5, who's now, officially her dad, but is not biologically, wasn't there at the beginning. When I found myself with a small child and on my own, I thought everything shifted, and I didn't want to go into clinical practice at that point. It felt it just didn't feel right for me, and I was a stay-at-home mum for a wee bit, started to volunteer at toddler group, and didn't know what to do to run sessions with small children. Tried a few things, food-based, because I had some of my background had also involved working with food quite a lot. And my mum said, "You've always told stories." And I thought, I'm going to tell the stories and the folklore that I had been immersed in since childhood, and then augment it with the knowledge of herbal medicine that some of it I'd grown up with. So some of it's very folklore based, and some of it clearly studied. And so I could weave that science in, and I think that kind of, for me, appeals to more people, because in an audience, you will always have some people that love the magical. There's no they don't need a solid scientific background. And some people just really like you to be able to turn around and say, this is symbolically expressed in a story, but here are the scientific facts. You and I both know from studying culture and folklore and plants that actually those little keynotes that just sound like hearsay or something your grandmother would have said, or are fables interwoven into cultures, do actually say what we use herbs for. And science for me is just a different way of expressing that knowledge, but I like to combine it all. And then and then there's something for everyone. I like that the academic side of me likes to justify the symbolic use in the folklore, and I think that's what makes my work unique. There are brilliant environmental storytellers out there, but I do this whole thing where I'm like, this is this, but try it,
Yeah.
taste it, smell it. Here's the science to back up what a 2,000-year-old story told you.
Love it. Yeah. And obviously, as a herbalist myself, I'm mesmerized by your way of sharing herbal knowledge. It's so creative, and it's really nice to get a feel of where that all came from your Romany roots and from your mum, and this very creative way of demonstrating it. Because I know that the way you present your knowledge of herbal, well, both storytelling and herbs, is quite three-dimensional, or maybe more than three-dimensional. You use a lot of sensuality and smell, and I've been to a few of your performances, and yeah, it's more than just storytelling. It's a very immersive experience in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, someone recently said there are so many layers, and I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm sorry. Some people find that quite intense, I think, but people
I think
that
it's a really refreshing surprise. I love it. Yeah, no, I wouldn't call it intense. It's surprising, and it's creative, and yeah, absolutely great. You were mentioning earlier that about sort of veering away from telling stories of other places and other lands because maybe other people from those areas are doing it themselves. However, you drew some attention to the course that we're collaborating on, which is part of a series of courses that are in the planning that you initiated last year with the Forest Path, I think it was called, wasn't it? And you very kindly invited me on to be part of the bonus surprise in the second part, which is called the Silk Roads. So tell me a little bit more. I mean, obviously I know about it, but tell our listeners more, because I know that you've added a couple of extra chapters. There was one that came out quite recently, chocolate, I believe, and one coming up which I don't know about. So do tell me more.
Okay, no worries. So really the course is developed partially because when I was writing the Time Traveller's Herbal, which came out in November last year, I really the starting point, like the setup for that book becoming a thing, was that I'd been working online on a course that started during a really bad year for me. I'd had cancer, I'd had bereavement, we'd had a massive shift in housing. Then when we did settle here, we then went into COVID, and so I had been keeping working, but my ability to go out and work in the way I usually do, I'd just come back from a 3-week tour of China. I was meant to be, I gigs down in London quite regularly, up in the northeast of Scotland, all over the place. And I was aware that initially due to my health, and then due to COVID, that I wasn't able to go out and work like that anymore. But I needed to keep being immersed. I usually love being in a place. I love finding the plants that grow there, what the people use there, talking to people. So that had gone. But I had, just before all this, encountered the work of Elizabeth Blackwell, who in 1737 was the first woman to publish a herbal. Now, Elizabeth not only had a great personal story, but she covered 500 plants in her, which illustrated this incredible, intense period of time when, due to some really horrible cultural aspects, slave trade, all sorts of dreadful acts were going on, but plants were coming into the country. The witch trials, the other great horror in Scottish history, was one of the other great periods of disharmony, was just coming to an end. But we were losing that connection to folk medicine, and medicine was becoming more mainstream, in some ways good, in some ways not so good. So there was this transition happening. And so the period she was illustrating these plants, she has nettles, she has tamarind, she has cocoa, she has dandelions. Incredible breadth of information. And so over the 4-year period, I had been, just as a sort of little thing to motivate me, keep me going, keep my interest up, I was looking at one herb at a time, looking at what she said about it, about the historical uses, about the folklore attached to it, the social history, and weaving it all together and just, chatting away about it online. Did a few online sessions with museums and things like that.
Yeah.
Great. But I ended up with a huge amount of material. So when I wrote the time travel herbal, and Elizabeth Blackwell was condensed into one chapter, and I started to bring in other, I love a bit of history. I bring in other time periods, other people's stories. A lot of them are women's stories, because I feel like quite often they are the lesser heard voices. And I was left with this bulk of material, and I thought, I don't want to, I draw on it in my live work, but people are really, really keen to hear it, and they are loving the unusual nature of this mixture, these layers, if you like, that we've talked about of herbal medicine, folklore, social history, and legend. And so I thought, I had a lovely mentee. Her other occupation was that she was a web designer is a web designer and photographer, and we were on a road trip. She'd been being mentored, or she'd been shadowing me during some work up in Orkney, and on the drive back down, I described what I would like my website to be like. A new thing. I wanted it to be sort of draw people in and feel a bit like my work. I wanted there to be things to do on there and ways you could engage with my work. And we came up with this idea of online courses. And she said, "What will you put in them?" And I went, "I've got all this stuff, this research, and the very curious herbal project that I'd been doing, and people love it. But I would almost like it to have a sort of form, a substance." And so we designed the courses, the forest. And then I thought, right, well, what else? How will people get the sensory element? And I thought, I know all these beautiful other creative herbalists. If I can bring people in as collaborators, they will send something out in the post, so people have a tangible element to go with the. There's written material, there are photographs, there are links to historical archives that you can access to augment the course. There are audio recordings, there are some films. And so I elected to collaborate. So first collaboration on the Forest Path was with Findhorn Flower Essences, who created a wonderful blend of tree-based essence, batch style energetic essences. So you get this little bottle of essence in the post that you can take as you read and hear about the trees, and there are ways of working with trees. The idea is you create a Loric Botanica, Materia Botanica, Lorica Materia Botanica. Oh God, I've even forgotten my own title. A Loric.
Quite a good tongue twister for warming up for your performances.
Oh, tongue twisters I get into. I'm just go with it. I just say, "Oh, I'm sorry, look it up and Google it." A Lorica Materia Botanica, which is a collection of your own stories and feelings about a plant, and a little made. It might be an essence, it might be a tea, but it might also be a little birch, besom, broom, a little collection of things that engage you deeply with the plants. So the Forest Path came first. We went on the Silk Roads, and the motivation really for the Silk Roads was what we've talked about before, those stories of other cultures that I rarely tell these days until I find myself in a school where I spot, because a lot of the art of the storyteller is to work on non-visible, like communication from the audience that you kind of learn to pick up on. You really learn to read your audience. And so I sometimes spot, I was working in an international school in Shanghai, for example, and I spotted that there was one Indian child in the audience, and he was quite isolated, and he had one friend and the other children were working together. And I heard the teacher say something about, was his language good enough? And he said, yes. I know my grandmother, he said something to me about, my grandmother tells me stories in English. And I thought, right, I've actually got an Indian story that is contemporaneous with the Vedas. I love this story. It's hilarious. Children love it. And I told this story, and it was purely because I saw that this child, who was the only Indian child in a class of 40, his face lit up. And I told this story, and he went, my grandmother tells the story. I've never heard anyone tell it before. I love it. And we all got turmeric out, and we were drawing with fresh turmeric root afterwards as the workshop element. And he was just, so I do still tell them, but I don't tell them as a mainstay of my work. And some of them, like the chocolate story that just came out a couple of weeks ago in that chapter, are really spiritual and have a religious element. I've had a lot of personal questioning about the one I've shared in the forthcoming chapter, and I've spoken to a Hindu friend of mine and sort of said, how do you feel about me sharing this? And she went, it's an extremely important story. I'm happy for you to share it. And I have elected to not tell it in my own words, but to read not the original from the Ramayana, but to tell Madhur Jaffrey, the Indian, the Anglo-Indian chef and story version. But I think there's something so important, right? I'm transgressing down all sorts of paths here. I guess what I'm saying is that some of those herbs, those things like tea and coffee that we covered in the Silk Roads, and chocolate, and then into some of the herbs that we often have resting in the back of the cupboards and that we ignore because maybe we bought tamarind once and then we don't know how to cook with it. Or we've got one recipe we use it in, but we don't use it on a regular daily basis. We need to engage with. Something about knowing those culturally incredibly important origin stories.
Absolutely.
Like, value ourselves and the plants that we use. Far more than wolfing down chocolate. If you know it's this unique gift from the gods that was given, that we're meant to engage with in a small amount, you're helping, you're literally giving your pancreas a hug. If you wolf a chocolate and it's full of sugar and fats, you're putting yourself in a different position. And so that's what I'm doing with the Silk Roads. So that's got it's not all there in one go. You literally can't wolf the Silk Roads. It's like chocolate. There's the forest path, you can go deep dive into 8 or 9 trees in one sitting. The Silk Roads I elected to release gently because there was reflection and thought going into each chapter. And the next one is going to be, it's meadow meanders, and it's looking at hedgerow and meadow wild plants, weeds. That's my favorite thing. Love a good old-fashioned Scottish weed. And so those hedgerow plants, we're going to do it in chunks, I think. They're coming up literally like summer and spring flowers, rain, sudden burst, nothing, huge flourish over there of something bright yellow. I mean, it's, that's what's happening. And then a final chapter later on this year.
Ah, great.
Yeah, it's there for ages. So
the final chapter, that's still under it. No little sneak preview of what that's going to be about. You can keep a secret if you want, if you're not ready to release it.
No one's even got the meadow meanders yet, but that would be like maybe at the end of, I think we're going to release it for Beltane, so for May Day at the beginning of May. The final chapter will be down the garden, through the garden. So it's going to be the kitchen garden and greenhouse.
Lovely.
Loving that one. I've already got quite a lot of that written. I know exactly where it's going. I've got that fantastic story, which you will have heard. I remember you being at this event, about how tomatoes in the 18th century were believed in Scotland to be used by witches to turn their enemies into werewolves. We didn't eat tomatoes. They were literally coming into the country from the Americas, with those merchants and traders of dubious intention, but they also brought back new recipes and new fruit and veg, as I said, and tomatoes were one of those. We didn't trust them. They're related to Atropa belladonna. We genuinely thought that they might kill us off. But yeah, we're doing cucumber and tomatoes and turnips and all sorts of fruit and veg from the garden in the first one.
Yeah, I love how it's bringing to life and sort of diving into the stories of all of these everyday foods and plants and herbs that we totally take for granted, because they've kind of been sterilized by these glass bottles that we see in the supermarket, and we don't know where they come from. I mean, we do because we study plants and herbs and so on, but most people don't even have a clue of the origin stories. It's so fascinating to kind of get to know plants in this really creative and fascinating way, and the sort of time traveling way that you work with storytelling and within your courses, as well as kind of seeing through the lens of different periods of time and history as well, because obviously our relationship to plants and cultures and so on shifts and changes through history. So that's a really also very interesting and creative way that you kind of bring these plants to life. So thank you so much for coming on to share about that today. So there's just a couple of things I wanted to ask before we close. Was what do you have in your teacup today? What is your drink of choice currently?
Today, what I've got in my teacup, and perfect for the Silk Roads, because we went with green tea as one of the opening chapters. So I have green tea, but mine has got ginger in it today, because I don't know. If I had one herb in my backpack, if I had to travel, ginger's definitely up there on being one of them. Good for your digestion.
Yes.
Any meal. Anti-inflammatory, all those things. Yeah, so I've got green tea and ginger today.
Wonderful. Well, snap, because I went for green tea too, but I'm here recording from Indonesia, and unlike the UK where black tea and milk is the kind of way to take your tea, here you rarely get milk. It's not really a milky culture, unlike India, where I've been fairly recently, where it's all about your milk teas and all the herbs. Whereas here it's usually quite sugary, a sugary black tea with jasmine in it. So it's quite, I just love, as I've been meandering through Southeast Asia in the past months and years, in fact, just seeing like the different ways that different cultures try their tea. So my what goes into my cup kind of morphs and changes. I'm not drinking a lot of black tea at the moment, but I'm quite into the Japanese kind of the powdered green tea that they do, which is quite nice.
Yeah, funnily enough, that's what mine is too. It's I was caught without tea in upstate New York, and it was a fabulous grocery store near Metabee Farm where we were working, and they had, bizarrely, and something I hadn't seen before here, but had powdered Japanese tea and leaf tea in a bag, and of course the powder infuses out of the bag, and then I'm just adding my own ginger. But I like that too. It was traveling in China, I think, made me really start enjoying my green tea a lot more.
Yes.
And my cup varies wherever I go as well. Totally. Yeah. I end up going, that's in a garden. I'm picking that and I'm popping it into my tea.
Yeah. And then one last final parting question is, what's a herb or a herbal remedy that you've come across on your travels that has integrated in your life in some way?
That's a really good question. A herb on my travels that I've integrated into my life. Probably trying to think back to when I first started working intensely with St. John's wort. And I suspect
Mm.
it was probably St. John's wort because it has continued to be my herbal support comfort zone, if you like. And I don't know. I don't think I encountered it until I first moved to Glasgow. So until I really started the beginning of this journey into herbal storytelling, and now I can't remember a time when it wasn't essential. I love everything about it. I love the fact you can squeeze it and it comes out red. I love that.
Mm.
um I love the taste. I love the sort of explosion of cheer in the mind that it brings. I love its wound healing stuff. But I think I also really appreciate that it is this herb that in Scottish folklore and in social history was associated with bringing safety and good luck to travelers. So if you chance upon it on a walk, then
Mhm.
use a bit and keep it about your person to keep you safe on the journey. So I guess St. John's Wort would probably be my go-to on that on that
Oh,
note.
nice. I noticed you're wearing yellow today, and because I know you, that's a really sort of special and herbally connected color for you. And yeah, it's been interesting. Some of the plants that you've mentioned in our chat today, obviously that sort of burst of yellow in the midsummer that's associated with St. John's wort. And then you mentioned turmeric earlier, which is obviously renowned for just staining everything yellow if you come into contact with it.
I hadn't realised
I'm
that.
very
That's quite funny now.
yeah. It's quite hard to get the fresh root back in Scotland. Whereas here, it's so easy to come across at the market. I mean, of course, you can get it at Asian markets and so on back in UK or Europe or wherever you may be listening to this podcast from. Yes, interesting. All the yellow, the sunshiny yellow herbs, and we're definitely coming into that season. It's round the corner. Well, maybe a couple of months away still. Getting ahead of myself. But Beltane is next week, which is heralding that time of year. On
And
the horizon.
I've actually got a big pan of dandelion flowers. Speaking of yellow, all things yellow, that I picked over the weekend. I was away and doing a bit of gardening, and I gathered all the dandelion flower heads from
Oh,
the slightly weed averse garden that I was working in, and yeah, brought them home. And so my
yeah.
next job after we end the call is to go and strain them and make some dandelion syrup. So yeah, you're right. I am
Oh,
a queen of yellow plants at the moment.
yeah. Well, it's definitely that yellow flowering time of year, isn't it? With the dandelions and primroses and what other spring? I'm not back in. I'm currently in Indonesia, so it's not yellow flowering time out here. But having lived in Scotland for many years, I know it is. Oh, daffodils, of course. They're probably dying back a little bit by this point. We're almost May.
We're slightly further north, so they're still managing here, and I think I've got, we've still got some daffs on the go. But yeah, the
Yeah.
gorse is out, and the
Oh,
other
cool.
lovely, and that means that kissing is back in season. So according to Scottish folklore, so
Yay.
yeah, it's
Just in
bursting
time
to
for
life.
Beltane.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. It's been a joy to connect and learn a bit more about your work and your past. And where's the best place for people to connect with you?
I do social media. I'm either Amanda Edmiston or Botanica Fabula, but my website has everything on it. So Botanica Fabula .co.uk. Yeah, .co.uk. What the? What is my website address? Web address?
It is. I'm actually
Google
on the
Botanica
screen.
Fabula, you'll find it.
botanicafabula.co.uk. That's the one. Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you to everyone who joined us on this podcast, the very first episode of the Wandering Herbalist. I've really enjoyed hearing about all of Amanda's herbal wanderings, all the way to China and through her storytellings to all through the Silk Road and all the way back to Scotland and throughout the UK. So thank you so much for sharing that. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and like it and share it. And I shall see you on the next one. Bye.